Whoop, we back in here. Hood counselor, hood Indian, hood guru. I know what time it is, man. Hood Indian TV. Y'all appreciate everybody's support, man. It's an early morning build, early morning coffee. You know what I'm saying? Time to get your mind right. We'll let some songs rock, some indigenous music rock. Shout out to the individuals that created this music too, man. Very inspirational. Something we need to hear more of. So we're gonna give it a couple minutes. You understand? I know it's a crazy hour. I know everybody's everywhere across the globe, so you'll be able to watch this on the playback as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you, and that will never fall apart. 'Cause you never ever open up your heart. I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you, and that will never fall apart. 'Cause you never ever open up your heart. And I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you, and that will never fall apart. 'Cause you never ever open up your heart. And I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you, and that will never fall apart. 'Cause you never ever open up your heart. And I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you, and that will never fall apart. 'Cause you never ever open up your heart. And I don't know the easy way to start. Yeah, I don't know the easy way to start. I'll tell you what I like about you.
Have been the name and logo of the team to change.
But Chief Wahoo is the tribe! That's our logo! So the heck with those haters!
Hit that like button on the way in. Hit that like button on the way in, tribe.
So the other day I was just sitting around talking to some homies about how I feel our people could use more self-love, especially the youth. Anyways, here's some medicine. Pass me that notebook, bro. Yo.
Asking native about immigration. Really? Hold up. Is you crazy? Think about your question, is you crazy? Created the system just to play me. Swearing up and down there ain't slavery. Genocide label just break. But walk on my mama who made me. Hold up. You crazy. Let's support Trump. Let's take it back. I'll pop the trunk. We don't know how to act. We don't know how to act. We don't know how to act. You don't want it like that. Back up on the microphone, you're number one native. I do it for the people, so no matter what they saying, G, no matter what they playing, B, no matter what we facing, we make it, we take it, remake it, then lace it. Our eyes are so ancient, yeah. Hair is so long, skin is so brown, spirit so strong, yeah. She is so smart. I am not worthy, so where do I start? Yeah. Get a grip. Baby girl's lips though, woo. Baby girl's hips though, woo. Attraction so natural it's silly. Kind of revolutionary, really. Loyal to my own, do you feel me? Loyal to my own, do you feel me? Music music that's radical, actually masterful, magical, tactical, tangible, valuables. Yo, shit is casual, gradually laughable, fashionable, factuals. I am impassable. Trail of tears and we still here. Wounded knee and we still here. Sand Creek and we still here. Cortez and we still here. Slavery and we still here. Smallpox and we still here. Boarding schools and we still here. Fuck what they talking about, still here. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Man, it feel good just to say it. Yeah, it feel good to be indigenous. Yeah, it feel good to be indigenous. Don't it feel good to be indigenous? Damn, it feel good, man, I'm feeling us. Yeah. You know that feeling? When you got your fresh Adidas on and your braids hella long, plus your game mad strong, and there's a power later on. You know that feeling? When the smell of fry is in the air and everybody's there and your old snag keep looking at your stink, but you don't even really care. You know that feeling? When your friend almost snagged their cousin and your family's kinda rugged and fridge full of commodity cheese, but you wouldn't trade it for nothing. You know that feeling? Ceremony at the end of the day. Feeling like you and the baby's the same. Looking up at the stars, glad you got your end in ways. I know that feeling. I'm in the position of fishing for individuals, feeling the mission of finding solutions outside of the system. In addition, demolition of politicians who put us in this condition. Listen, this is post-apocalyptic scripture. If the revolution pops tomorrow, but I get shot tonight, I'll come back from the afterlife and still stand with you. That's real. Red Eagle's still the best, just chill. I don't really care how you feel. All my real natives know the deal. Keep living. Look at what your ancestors giving. And your mama Earth keep giving. She keep giving. Suicide, nah, I'm living. Trail of tears and we still here. Wounded knee and we still here. Sand Creek and we still here. Cortez and we still here. Slavery and we still here. Smallpox and we still here. Boarding schools and we still here. Fuck what they talking about, still here. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Man, it feel good just to say it. Yeah, it feel good to be indigenous. Yeah, it feel good to be indigenous. Don't it feel good to be indigenous? Damn, it feel good, man, I'm feeling us. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Damn, it feel good to be a native. Man, it feel good just to say it. Don't it feel be indigenous? Yeah, it feel good to be indigenous. Man, it's real good to be indigenous. Damn good, man, I'm feeling us. On my own land. On my own land, hey. On my own land. On my own land. On my own land, hey. On my own land. On my own land, hey. Hey. Oh man. Yo, bless. You outdid yourself on this one, homie. Ready? The tree. Chicano.
Shout out Red Eagle, still here. Make sure y'all gotta look him up, brother. Putting on for the culture. Y'all know what time it is. Let's rock one more. 7 featuring Hurt, man. Somebody lied to us, man. Support that. This is facts, though. Everything he dropped in that was real. You know what I'm saying? So let's go ahead and support that move, man. That shit dope. That shit was dope. We about to get into the bill, man. We got a little visual for y'all. I want y'all to peep out. We gonna get into it. Bless be the tribes too, man. Really morning with it. Appreciate y'all coming out, fucking with me. So let's see what's going on in Indian country. You gotta stay up relevant on the news, you feel me? So we don't dig into, hopefully we don't get copyrighted. You know how they on YouTube now. They turn they rules all the way up. So we about to get to it.
Year of those programs. In 2014, they cut us off our medical because we are black, and they say we have the wrong card. Well, I said, who gave us those cards?
Let me run it back because y'all need to hear what she's talking about here. We're gonna run that back. We're gonna run it back, run it back.
About our own nation because we are black. Not because we're Indian, but because we are black. We have black blood. We are counted every year for the money that they get for all the government programs, and they vote us out every year of those programs. In 2014, they cut us off our medical because we are black, and they say we have the wrong card. Well, I say, who gave us those cards? It's our nation, and they know we belong there. And those cards should be fixed if they need to be fixed, but they cut us off of our medical. We need our chief and all the administration to stop discriminating against their own people. We're here to fight and stand for our nation. We are Seminoles with black blood, and we are proud of it. And they have to accept it for what it is. It's against the Constitution of the United States of America, and it's also against the Constitution of Seminole Nation, and they're breaking their own laws. And we're here today because we're asking the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to help us in this cause, to help us come out and stand with us and investigate our nation for the problem that they're having right now with the blackness of our skin and the crook in our hair. We are Seminoles, and we will always be Seminoles. We were born Seminoles, we will die Seminoles, and we stand for Seminole Nation. We're asking the BIA to do their job and investigate Seminole Nation for discrimination.
Very powerful words there coming from Laetta Osborne Sampson, who was a member of the Seminole Nation Council from the Cesar Bruner Band. Welcome to Burn It Down with Kim Brown, everybody. Happy holiday week to you here. And that clip from Laetta basically symbolizes the frustrations that many Black Native Americans feel towards their home nations, their Indian tribes, their native nations to which they belong, to which they were born in. They inherited this Native American heritage, and they still are experiencing discrimination, being treated as less than, citizenship being denied, benefits being denied. In today's program, we're going to talk about the double struggle of being Black and being Indigenous in America. And I think today is a super appropriate day to have that conversation. So I would like to bring in a great panel. I'm very excited about today's program, everybody. By the way, don't forget, go to Burn It Down with Kim Brown's YouTube channel and hit subscribe if you don't mind. This is where you're going to find these kinds of conversations right here, brought to you by The Real News. But I'd like to welcome our panel because this is a conversation that needs to be had often and repeatedly because there are oppressed and marginalized groups even within oppressed and marginalized groups. And Black Native Americans have had this experience for hundreds of years now. So let me welcome our panel. First of all, familiar face right here, the new host, co-host of the forthcoming program here on The Real News, De-Colonize News Hour. She's also an Indigenous activist and journalist. Johnny J is joining us today. We're also being joined today with Antonio Cosme. Antonio is a radical Indigenous economist and activist. He's also a beekeeper with Southwest Bee Detroit. He's an educator with the National Wildlife Federation and also a gardener with the Southwest Grows. He organized with the Detroit Indigenous Peoples Alliance and to end Columbus Day and to remove the Columbus statue in downtown Detroit. We're happy to have Antonio back on the program. And we're joined today also with Marilyn Vann. Marilyn is the president of the Descendants of Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribes Association and the African Indians of the Five Civilized Tribes Foundation. She was a litigant in the federal lawsuits Vann v. Zinke and Cherokee Nation v. Nash, which reaffirmed the 1866 treaty rights of Black Cherokee freedmen tribal members to retain their rights to tribal membership within the Cherokee Nation. Ms. Vann, she has a very extensive resume here. She and her organization continue to fight racism and apartheid perpetuated against persons of African ancestry who are members or descendants of members of the Five Civilized Tribes. So panel, thank you all so much for making time to talk about this important topic today. We appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, Marilyn, I'm so happy to have you here. You're joining us today from Oklahoma, and I think that's where I want us to begin this conversation. Many people, I don't think, are super familiar with the experience of Black Native Americans. If you could you give us sort of a brief history of how Black Native Americans came to be and the sort of discrimination that they have historically faced, not only from larger America, but within their native tribes, and what are some of those issues look like today?
Okay. The majority of the Blacks of the five tribes, and I'm talking about Cherokee, Creek, Seminole, Choctaw, and Seminole Nation, have received certain rights based on 1866 treaties, which were signed between those tribes and the government. Now, prior to that, the majority of the persons who were living in those tribal reservations prior to the Civil War with African ancestry were living as slaves. And some people find that hard to believe, but there are many public documents which prove that. Constitutions of tribes, such as the Cherokee Nation, which talk about slavery, which outline the discrimination against persons of African descent. The Creek Nation Tribal Code, the Choctaw Nation, Chickasaw Nation. I mean, it's clear that it is there. And as I said, these are public documents. Even and in those tribes, there were plantations. Black people, as I said, were enslaved. Now, that doesn't mean every person with African descent was a slave at the time of the Civil War. The majority of them were. There were some free Blacks that were legally living in the tribes. You had citizenship even, but that's not the majority of the people. And it wasn't necessarily an easier slavery, especially when you talk about the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations, than what was going on in the Deep South. Even the reason that these tribes joined the Confederacy was to keep Black people permanently enslaved. So when a white person had all kinds of rights to be able to come into different tribes, set up businesses, marry an Indian, all kinds of things that a Black person, a free Black person even, just wasn't allowed to do. Now, after the Civil War, again, you have these treaties, which in your Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole tribes, those tribes agreed to adopt the freedmen as citizens within the treaties with the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes. The people, it gave those tribes the option to adopt the freedmen. And if they did, they would receive funds from the United States government. So, that doesn't mean that after this, between Civil War and Oklahoma statehood, there was no discrimination at all. But there was still, some. A white person coming into the tribe still had better privileges, but things were certainly much better than in the Deep South, and the Indian tribes. But things really started getting off the trail again was when the U.S. government put more and more pressure on the tribes to divide the tribal lands, and so the men from DC came in. They used the tribal rolls, but instead of just registering people by families, they decided, well, we're going to use this blood quantum to determine when people's land would be sellable. So they decided if someone was a quarter blood, a half blood, of this and that and the other, things that Indian tribes across the country had never used. I mean, nobody sitting here has an American blood quantum. I mean, the whole thing would have been unheard of, unthought of. But, there's people that live and die, based on the number that's on a card. Well, almost all people of African descent in the tribes were listed on the freedmen sections of the Dawes rolls, which didn't list a blood quantum for them. It didn't mean that people didn't have Indian blood. It didn't mean there wasn't a tribal roll that said that they had Indian ancestry. But anyway, this is what the tribes are using now to register people. So when Oklahoma became a state, and Oklahoma was mostly people from the Deep South came to Oklahoma before statehood. Mostly invaders, people coming in here, sneaking in on land runs. They set up these Jim Crow laws and the Oklahoma Constitution that said anyone with a drop of African blood was legally a Negro, subject to Jim Crow laws. Anybody that had no African blood was legally white. So the tribes again began to shift, toward anti-blackness. Now, I'll tell you, the tribes were not really functioning as governments, right after Oklahoma statehood. So nobody was being registered. The chief was being appointed. The tribal legislatures really were not meeting. But then you start coming into the 1970s, where the federal government begins to allow the tribes to exercise more sovereignty. There's laws passed. And so then when you start getting into later years, as the tribes get more wealth, there's movements to try to put the blacks out. The problem started in the Cherokee Nation when the freedmen tribal members didn't want to vote for the chief at that time when he was running again, Ross Swimmer. So the way he decided to do, well, I'll just block these people from voting. In other tribes, like the Creek Nation, the chief, I think it was like 1979, the members of the tribe were going to get a large payment of money from the federal government. So, rather than share this with the freedmen, it's, well, let's put them out here. So so there was a constitution to put the people out. So, it's just been a fight ever since. With the Cherokees, as I said, there wasn't a tribal constitution that allowed them to put the freedmen out, but basically the freedmen were not being registered. They weren't being allowed to vote. And so ultimately this, there was litigation. I was a federal litigant. There were some lawsuits in tribal court. So then for a short period of time, there was some registration of freedmen, but the chief set up a movement. By this time, we have Chad Smith to put the freedmen out. He had an illegal petition, used tribal funds, tribal employees, all of this. A lot of nobody said we're going to kick the NIG blank blank out publicly, but it was, well, these people, they're going to take all the money. They're going to use up the money. They're going to use it interested in benefits. And the tribe is full of people who don't know anything about the treaties. They don't know anything about tribal history. Almost the vast majority of people are completely Caucasian looking in the tribe, not just the Cherokee Nation, the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations too. But as I said, there's been a lot of anti-Blackness. And, and just to show difference, there are other adopted classes of people in the Cherokee Nation. There was a band of Delaware and a band of Shawnee that were adopted in the tribe. It's back in the old country before the removal. There were quite a few Creek Indian people who received citizenship in the Cherokee Nation. There's never been a movement to throw any of those people out. Only the freedmen people. So this, so clearly it's a matter of color and people using a race card to gain and keep power. So that is, that's a lot of what's, it's been going on. You get people, even though, for instance, it's not like what was going on in Mississippi, Alabama, where you had lynchings of people or, homes being, burnt down by somebody like the Klan. Not to say that there were Klan members who were members of Indian tribes, completely white-looking people in the 1920s and 30s. Some became Klan leaders here. But I'm just saying there wasn't that kind of violence. What's really been used in more modern times against the freedmen has been economic power. If you are a tribe that's getting billions of dollars a year from casinos and hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government to run programs, you can go and buy newspapers and put your truth out there. The federal government will pay for, your attorneys because you can get a grant from the Department of Justice to run a legal department. And so even though like in the Cherokee Nation, after about 17 years of litigation, we finally were able to get our rights reconfirmed by a federal judge, you still have some people running departments or the like that they don't want the freedmen there. They may slow down a freedman person getting a benefit or a service, although that's not something that Mr. Hoskin or Mr. Baker, who is a former chief, something that they support. But the bottom line is there's discrimination that's going on, and we were just talking. You showed something there about Leetta Osborne Sampson, a very close friend of mine. That is the Seminole Nation. They are, after losing a lawsuit about the freedmen, that what they decided to do is, well, we'll just reissue them cards, and put on the back, voting purposes only. They block the people from getting services. They try to get other tribes not to allow them to get services in their medical clinic. When an outside attorney general for the tribe told them that, this kind of discrimination needed to end, they cursed the man, they threatened him. This is with the cameras running in the council house. And the chief, agreed with the chief at that time, agreed with them, agreed that this discrimination needed to stop. Some of the people, they jumped up, shouted it, called him an NIG lover, all of this kind of stuff. And all of I'm not talking about things that happened 100 years ago. I'm talking about things that have been happening a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And you have a lot of, just talking about the petition.
Well, hold on. Before you get to the petition, Marilyn, hold on. You gave us a lot to process there, a lot of history. For basically, you almost gave us like 150 years worth of history in about 10 minutes. So that was pretty amazing. Johnny J, I want to punt to you if I could, because you you are a woman with a nation in your heritage. I know some of those names we heard are indeed your nations. I wanted to ask, how is this history taught? How did you come to know about the freedmen, how Black people were part of Native American tribes, and what were the attitudes that you experienced as a Native woman learning about the Black part of Native American tribes, but also, how these freedmen, number one, they view themselves as natives, but how was that instructed to you? How was that imparted upon you, and how did you receive this information? I'm curious.
It wasn't. That history is not taught from a cultural standpoint. Like, I grew up learning about my Choctaw culture. I grew up within my communities, within my family, and I never even heard of the freedmen until I was 32. And that was because of what was going on in Oklahoma at the time, with the freedmen going to court to try and fight for their rights, and the Cherokee Nation trying to, disenroll the freedmen people from their tribe. So that was how I learned about it, was from what the media was covering at the time. But other than that, it was not something that was taught or even talked about. And it's really strange now, because when you look at the tribes, the 5 civilized tribes, they were some of the earliest tribes to be assimilated heavily. And that's why they're called the 5 civilized tribes. And we have adopted a lot of ways that have really kind of upheld white supremacy. And like Marilyn was saying, like, we have Choctaws who were clan leaders that were willingly fighting on the side of the Confederacy. For some of the 5 civilized tribes, they were forced into choosing to side with the Confederacy. But there were tribes that willingly decided to be like, hey, we're going to do this, just for the reason that Marilyn said. They want to continually keep Black people oppressed. And it was a way to kind of uphold that kind of racial hierarchy, I guess you would say. And kind of like believe like, oh, well, if we act more like the white man, then they're going to treat us better. And that's not what it was, because also when I started learning about the freedmen history, a lot of people, like when I would start asking questions, a lot of the narrative was that it was a more benevolent slavery, that it wasn't as violent or as horrible as it was for like white men owning Black people. Like, it was taught as a benevolent slavery. And I actually bought into that narrative until I started learning about the history from the freedmen themselves, and, reading the history that they were able to put together. And it's like, oh, so, everything that I was taught is totally wrong here. And there's a lot of nuance that goes into it, because when you look at the history of the US, Native people, Black people, this country was founded on our blood and through our labor. And, there's a lot of, I guess you would say, there's a lot of writing on it, on keeping us divided and keeping us apart. So throughout history, like, we have had to make some horrible decisions in order to survive, but that's not an excuse. It's not an excuse now. Like, we can say, oh yeah, well, they wanted our tribe to survive, and this was a way to do it. Because for the 5 civilized tribes, being heavily assimilated meant that Native women were raped, stolen, and sold into marriages with white men so that they could gain power within our tribe because of the way that our kinship systems work. And you start looking about how that kind of started to play a part in, like, now a lot of our people are very white passing and they act very white. Choctaw Tribe is one where, there is a lot of colorism. There's a lot of issues that arise even for us non-Black natives, where we are kind of discriminated against because we're a little bit darker, because we want to be more traditional, because the Choctaw Nation has been very assimilated to the point where a lot of our spiritual history has been lost. And you look at our taglines now for the tribe, and it's like faith, culture, family. But the faith that they're talking about is the Christian faith. And if you talk to a lot of Choctaw people, like, they talk about our spirituality as if we were always Christian people, as if we were always just very kind of white. And even with the Trail of Tears, before we started walking the Trail of Tears, people think we were leaving like little huts and traditional villages, but that's not true. We were leaving huge plantations. We were leaving cities. And those were being taken over by white people that were allowed to move in once we were forcefully removed. And, you know, again, the freedmen had to walk that Trail of Tears with us. They had to go through the same horrendous atrocities that Native people were going through. And a lot of that, it kind of plays into the idea of, well, they suffered with us. So, you know, we kind of weren't as harsh with them as we were to other people, or as white people were to Black people. And that's not true, because there is no benevolent slavery. There's no nonviolent slavery.
I think this was an interesting bill. I ain't heard one this interesting in a while. You know what I mean? It's clear, concise, and pretty.
And when it comes to the freedmen, you know, it's, to me, they are Choctaw, they are Seminole, they're Chickasaw, they're, you know, Creek, without a doubt. Like, I don't even think there should be freedmen roles and tribal roles. They should be on the same role, because regardless of the circumstances, the minute that our people decided to bring them into our communities,
all types of Indians.
They made them Choctaw. They made them Chickasaw and
tribe,
Seminole.
man.
The minute we started sharing our languages, our cultures, our traditions, and bringing them in, you know, that through our kinship systems, that is how you become Choctaw. Because, you know, in a lot of Native people, we always say it's not just blood that makes you Native. It's that connection that we have to our communities, to our languages, our traditions, our cultures. Like, that is what makes us who we are. And we always talk about our identities not being racial, but socio-political. And that's what I see going on right now with the freedmen. They should be, you know, citizens of our tribes without a doubt, without hesitation, and not denied their birthright. Because, you know, there are a lot of Black natives who are Native by blood. And again, you know, the same reason that there's a lot of white people who are Native by blood that find it, you know, that comes from a lot of rape, that comes from, you know, being sold into slavery and being sold to people. Like, there's a lot of things that go into this identity and nuance that gets lost. And it's so frustrating to me, because despite all of that, like, these are our people. Like, these are Choctaw people, these are Seminole people, these are our knowledge keepers, our language keepers, and they carry our history with them as much as we do. And it's so frustrating, because there's so much anti-Blackness in Indian country that even outside of the 5 civilized tribes, we have to confront that daily with people saying, well, they're not Native by blood. And it's like, well, you don't know the history here. Like, they are Native by blood. They're Native by culture. In every way that you can be considered Native, they are. And so it's so frustrating to me, just because this history kind of gets swept under the rug. And even now with Deb Haaland coming into being Secretary of Interior, I can't remember. But
it's crazy that she understands that you're Native by blood, and our own people don't understand they're Native by blood. You gotta stop this shit, man. You can't make this up.
Friedman, you know, tweeting about it, and I was like, oh, holy crap. Like, how did this escape my notice? Because I do keep up with the news in Indian country. And to see that policy, and to see how they were previously included, and that this reauthorization intentionally excluded them, just blew my mind, because it speaks to how non-civilized tribes, how natives view Black natives, and how they view freedmen. And it's a very contentious issue, even, you know, within Oklahoma, because it's so divided. Like, I get put on the outs quite a bit for, you know, supporting the freedmen just unconditionally, like they are our people. And just saying that is controversial, and it shouldn't be.
Wow. Well, hold on right there, Johnny J, because I do want us to circle back to Congresswoman Deb Haaland, I believe the first Native woman to ever be elected to Congress. She's under consideration by the Biden administration for a cabinet position to be Secretary of the Interior. And that's bringing up a lot of questions. But before we go there, Antonio, you know, both Johnny and Marilyn brings up the history of and the continued practice of anti-Blackness from Indigenous people towards Black people. And this summer, you know, we saw a lot of solidarity between Indigenous activists and Black Lives Matter activists because, you know, we have a shared oppression on this continent, although it is different in different experiences. But how do these anti-Black attitudes, despite, you know, our obvious solidarity we see them still resurfacing as the woman who spoke at the beginning of the show, Leetta Osborne Sampson, the Black Seminole woman, talking about how the Seminole are systemically disenfranchising their Black members of benefits that they rightly deserve. So talk to me about how you have seen or experienced anti-Blackness as an Indigenous man towards Black folks.
Yeah, so I'm Coahuiltecan and Boricua. So
remember I was speaking about the money they was hiding, the $1.81 billion that was found that was hidden from the Black Indian nations. Yeah, this is verification.
And we were colonized by the Spanish, and a lot of our peoples were kind of absorbed into the Spanish colonial mission communities. But I just wanted to give my background a little bit to introduce myself. But I'm a native of Detroit. I live in Detroit. And up here, as you go north, apparently I'm learning, about the tribes out in the Southeast, but as you go north, Indigenous communities get a lot more light skin. And as we were working on this campaign, I don't typically talk about this sort of like inner politics, but I think it's relevant for this conversation. But as we were working on this campaign to end Indigenous Peoples Day, we live in Detroit, and I am very much of the values of these women on this panel, where our idea is we have to connect the historic anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity that's at the heart of the United States logic. Red lands plus Black labor equals white gold. We have to connect that racial ancestral history with the work that's happening now and with contemporary movements and contemporary problems. Detroit is the Blackest major city in the entire country. It was taken over through this process of emergency management where we had our water system stripped away, our democracy taken away. And we really wanted to connect all of those things together. So a lot of us who are in this committee decided to make it Indigenous and African Peoples Day. And that was the plan. Just to make it very relevant to the 80% Black city, the Blackest major city in the entire country. And there are no tribes in the city, but there is a large Native American nonprofit, and with leaders within that nonprofit opposed our efforts to make it Indigenous and African Peoples Day. And for me, like as somebody who, it was strange because I'm not Anishinaabe, but I'm in Anishinaabe land. And Anishinaabe people are kind of like bossing up on me and telling me like, it's gotta be just Indigenous Peoples Day, like we're doing it all over the country. And for me, I'm like, Columbus came to my ancestors' lands well before he made it. Like he never came up here. This is not like, this isn't like an identity politic that y'all like have, any sort of like say in. Like you shouldn't be making like the solidarity that we're building, you shouldn't oppose because it's more powerful, it's more relevant. We ended up, because it was such a big divide within the committee, and when some of the Anishinaabe folks spoke out on it, a lot of other people in the committee backed down because, they didn't have, like there were Black people, there was, mixed people, like mixed people of Mesoamerican ancestry like myself. So it was like, yeah, it stymied the project for 2 years. And we finally just like went ahead and did it and make an Indigenous Peoples Day. And as an alternative, I've started this thing called the De-Colonial Solidarity Feast, which we didn't do this year because of COVID. But it's like something we're doing the day before Indigenous Peoples Day, where we bring together Black and Native people to build on that shared history, that shared legacy. And it's really, really unfortunate that anti-Blackness bleeds so deeply into Indigenous communities. I see it. There's a perennial question within all Indigenous community of who is or who isn't. This is like across the entirety of the United States, and I'm sure all over settler societies, there tends to be this conversation of who is and who isn't. If you grew up in the culture, if you grew up in cities, if you grew up on the res, If you were adopted out, who's native, like, can they prove it? People are fake native, fake veteran. Like, it's a perpetual, exhausting conversation that happens all over Native country. But particularly where you find the indigenous folks overlapping with whiteness in a great degree, you're going to find higher amounts of anti-Blackness more generally. And I think it's really important, if we look at the roots of this, it's capitalism. It's the States sort of like ideology, culture, bleeding into taking, precedent over, more traditional ancestral ideologies around race and belonging. And I think it's really noteworthy what exactly it was, the attributes of the 5 civilized tribes that made them, gain acceptance by the federal government. That's accepting private property, living in European-style built homes, adopting settler agricultural practices, adopting Christianity, adopting centralized governments, in the style of the United States more, and European folks more, having literacy and educational things happening in English, which means kind of like stamping out your native languages and cultures, participating in the market exchange of capitalism in those terms, writing constitutions, breeding with white people, and key for this part of the country, plantation and slavery practices. And I think that's something that, like, you can't kind of ignore, because it's in the United States' interest to perpetually grow people who identify with the settler system, anti-Blackness, slavery, U.S. European American settler land management practices. It's in their interest to get more and more people adopted to those ways, taking people who were, in the Anishinaabe case, a lot of the Northern Anishinaabe folks were not planters, but taking them and keeping them and making them sedentary people. That's all part of it. And I think a lot of the anti-Blackness comes from adopting to that culture, and also, wanting to adapt yourself to the United States. And it's inherent in the United States that as people become Americanized, as people become, even for white people, when they lived in their ethnic enclaves, they slowly moved towards becoming white, becoming American. And almost always that practice included, for Irish people, for instance, in New York and Boston, becoming a cop and reinforcing anti-Blackness. Whereas they weren't white when they came. In order to be white, you have to adopt anti-Blackness. There's a long history of Irish people who were colonized by England. There's a group called the San Patricios, and they were fighting in the Spanish-American War, and they actually betrayed the United States, because when they were marching on Mexico, they recognized that, we're fighting for England, and we're Irish people. This isn't right. So they actually betrayed the United States and joined Mexico and fought for Mexico, the San Patricios. So like, to go from there to becoming cops and becoming all this stuff you'd see in, Irish Boston movies. There's a streak of them that were popular for a while. But it's just part of the process of Americanization.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate you raising that point, Antonio, about, who's Native and who isn't. And I think that's really the integral argument, that, at least from a person on the outside looking in, it appears as though that is what the struggle of the Black Native Americans is right now in 2020, about who is Native and who isn't. And as Laetta Osborne Sampson at the top of the show talked about, the Seminole want to count us when it's time to swell the rolls and receive federal dollars. But when it's time to distribute those resources, we get cut off. And Marilyn, I want to circle back to you about that point, because, does this really come down to money? Does this come down to capitalism, in a sense where Black Native Americans are being, help me out with the term, is the term disenrolled from tribal roles in order to deny them the benefits and services that they are entitled to? Is that the argument or the case here?
Yes. A lot of this really comes down to money, the dollar, even when it came back to the treaties. Let's just talk about the Choctaw Nation. When they pushed for a treaty that said if the freedmen were adopted, they'd be limited to 40 acres of land, the freedmen, and the tribe would have to be paid. Well, when the Dawes rolls were made and the allotments were done, everybody else in the tribe, including white men who had only been married to an Indian woman for a year or two, got 320 acres of land. So then, as I said, you jump into the early 1980s where the Choctaws have a constitution that they didn't allow the freedmen to even vote on to put the freedmen out. So, for instance, the Choctaw Nation got hundreds of millions of dollars in COVID-19 relief money. The freedmen didn't get any of that money. None of the job training, none of that stuff, none of the programs are the freedmen able to participate in. As I said, even with your Seminole Nation, yes, it beefs up the tribe's money for the head count. And again, they got hundreds of millions of dollars too. But then when it comes to sharing the money, no, the freedmen need to get out. They need to go to the back of the bus. And as I said, these council meetings, just talk about the Seminole Nation, where, the council has voted the freedmen not to share in this and not share in that. These are the tribe's records. These programs, the housing programs, for instance, that make it clear that the freedmen can't share, or the way that it's pointed, the freedmen will never be able to share in the programs. These are public documents. They're on their websites. So it's not a matter of just somebody just sitting up here and saying it. So a lot of it comes down to the money, who's going to control the money, who's going to share in the money, as well as anti-Blackness. People running away from Blackness, wanting Blacks to continue to stay on the bottom.
Johnny J, I mean, there is no competition, right? I mean, Native people have had it horrible on this continent. Black people, people of African descent have also had it horrible. But it's so shocking and so disheartening to hear about the active racism aimed at Black Native Americans from their own tribes. I mean, how prevalent are these attitudes in your opinion? Because we know, for example, white people, right, are usually raised to be racist, raised to be anti-Black, raised to have this idea of white superiority. But how prevalent are these attitudes from your experience in Indian country? I mean, are these widely held attitudes? Are people overt with their racism, as in certain examples, as Marilyn has outlined? Tell us about what you have seen and heard.
It is very prevalent. Like, even when you look at our languages, in almost every tribal language, I can't remember who did it, but a couple years ago, somebody put out on Twitter, like, how do you say Black people in your language? And a lot of the words that were put forth were very derogatory in the way that they were, like, what they were translated into in English. Like, they actually meant the N-word in our language. Like, it wasn't just Black person or Black skin, like, it translated to the N-word. And, there was other ways that they described Black people too that were just so derogatory. And you're thinking, like, wow, this is so prevalent. But, it's just, like, so ingrained. Like, you don't think anything of it either as a Native person until you get older and you start learning about anti-Blackness and you start kind of being exposed to other worldviews. Because from your perspective, if you're just growing up in your native language and you hear people using these words, you think that it just means Black person. And you think that it just means, oh, they're describing Black people, not realizing that they're using very anti-Black language and have very Black, anti-Black ideals. And for me, it was something that was very prevalent in my family growing up, just anti-Blackness in my community. I do remember that I had a friend who was Black, and he had come to a homecoming game, and he came with my friend Diana, and I was just blown away about how people were so hostile to him that he was there. And people just, I can't believe that she brought a Black guy. I can't believe, he had the nerve to come here. Like, these were attitudes from the community, not even knowing him. And he was just there for a basketball game. And he was getting so much heat from just community members, just people giving him dirty looks, just treating him horrible. And I was sitting there like, wow, I never realized like it was this bad. Like, I never realized that our community was so anti-Black. But then it started to click because, our community was predominantly white and Native. I think in all the years that I had gone to school there, I think we only had one Black student, and he was probably there for maybe not even a semester, and he transferred out. And, I think a lot of that has to do with the attitude that people have in the community towards Black people. Like, it's just so prevalent, and it's not talked about in a way that, oh, it's bad. Like, it's just kind of like normal, like, oh, this is the way it's always been. And, people just kind of are so casual about it that unless you are very tuned into it, like, you kind of miss it for the most part. Like, even in my family, we have different tribal members that have married out, and, you go to different tribes. And like for the Kiowa, I was always very shocked when I heard, when they were talking about Black people, they would say Kongion. And I was thinking, that's like, to hear it, it's just a Native word. But then once you start learning about anti-Blackness, you're realizing like, oh, that has a very derogatory beginning and statement. And when you look at how people treat Black people and treat Natives who have married Black people and had kids, it's terrible. Like, it's like, my siblings are white passing and white coded. My mom had, with my stepdad, like, he's white, she's Native, and it was acceptable. Nobody batted an eye. But, if you were a Native woman who was dating a Black guy or even married one, it was just a travesty in our tribe. Like, people were just so upset about it and couldn't believe that it happened. And, like, oh, where did we go wrong? Like, these attitudes are just so prevalent in Indian country. And it's what has created this marginalized identity within a marginalized community, because, Native people are so invisible, but Black Natives are even more invisible. I used to work for a Native fashion magazine, Native Max magazine. We were one of the only publications and one of the first to highlight Black Native people, to give them a platform and to show them as models. Because when you look at Native fashion, when you look at Native entertainment, you don't see Black Natives being highlighted. And we have so many who have like really just broke down some tremendous barriers and succeeded beyond what, we could even believe, but yet they never get the recognition that they deserve because they're Black and Native. And people will constantly try to invalidate their identity and say, well, they're not Native, they're Black. It's just something that is just so prevalent, so disgusting. And it's just a cycle that has been perpetuated because, for the way that the system is set up, there's a reason why these rifts have been put in between Black and Native people for us to have, these ideas towards each other, misconceptions and everything. There's a reason. And that reason is because once we unify, once we mend those rifts, then we're that death blow to white supremacy. But the way that the system is set up right now is if we don't address anti-Blackness within Indian country, then our sovereignty and our rights and justice for the Native community will always come at the expense of Black people. And kind of vice versa. If Black people were to get reparations without involving Native people and to imagine how that would look like, then it would come at the backs of Native people again. So we're kind of constantly at odds. So there's a reason why solidarity is necessary and why we have to address anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity and find ways to mend these rifts and make amends, because you have to make amends. You have to make reparations, especially as Native people. Like, we owe the freedmen a huge debt, and we need to stop denying them their birthright, because until we do, then there's not going to be justice. Like, there's not going to be a better way forward until we're able to work together.
Antonio, what's it going to take to decolonize some of these attitudes? I mean, you outlined the ways in which the 5 civilized tribes, which, by the way, that phrase makes my skin crawl when I hear it, because it's smack of white supremacy. Like, oh my God, the civilized tribes, holy shit. But like, what's it going to take to sort of decolonize these attitudes? And mind you, I know white supremacy has done a number on all of us, even on white folks, right? But for the purposes of this conversation, you know, we have seen plenty of examples of Black and Native solidarity. But to overcome this hump of anti-Blackness and racism, in your opinion, what is it going to take?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to take work on all sides. I start by talking about this real quick. Like, even within African American communities here in Detroit, it happens a lot. This sort of debate also happens a lot on the blogosphere and Instagram spaces, where young Native folks are combating. There tends to be a vibe, and I don't know with your guys' experiences in southeastern United States, within the what people would call hoteps of African American folks who claim that all indigenous peoples are African, and so there is a totalicizing sort of aspect to that, and I think that becomes it's a minor problem. It's really not a problem. It's not, because it has no power and has no real impact on like people. It's just like rhetoric. There's books, there's stories, it's conversations. And sometimes I see some of that rhetoric as being useful in connecting shared struggles, shared histories. But I think there is some like ideological things that need to happen on all sides in order for us to move forward in a good way. It is true and important to acknowledge that African people and Native people have been exchanging, trading, communicating long before Columbus. And it was actually and people from, the Caribbean who said that, and it was documented by a number of the scholars and priests who came with Columbus, that the Native people of the Caribbean said, yeah, we receive, there's dark-skinned Black people who came in trade with us and communicated with us. They gave us like gold-tipped pointed spears. There is a history of that, and there is a relationship, and there are many waves of people who have come to the Americas from, Polynesian cultures, from the Alaskan land bridge, from, the Vikings came. I mean, many waves of people. Some of the Mediterranean empires probably came through, African empires came through. It's a good chance that Chinese people actually came through as well, some sort of Chinese empire. So we have to acknowledge this long, complicated history of people moving to different places. And also recognize that colorism is something that we're dealing with, within the African diaspora as well, heavily, constantly conversation that's happening around that. So it's not something that's specific to, Native communities, it happens a lot in Puerto Rico too. But I'd say a lot of this comes from this scarcity mindset that capitalism pushes out towards people. That there's only so many resources, so we have to guard them and hoard them. There's only so much land, so we have to protect this. They get the casinos and we didn't get any reparations. There's this us versus them thing, which is so easy to play into. And it's very much so in the interest of the government, the United States, settler society, for Black and Indigenous people to do that. And I think we have to reframe the stories that we tell about ourselves, the histories that we uplift, not to erase anti-Blackness or Indigenous slave ownership or any of these things, because it's important to engage with those topics and remember them and discuss them and problematicize them. But we have to think about the way that the logics of Christianity is about absorbing Indigenous cultures and stripping them of their land-based practices. The logic of the United States has been about stripping away Native cultures and Native land. U.S. history has repeatedly, time and time again, taken away Native people's land, African Americans people's land, from the Reconstruction to the 2008 financial crisis, which stripped 50% of Black wealth, most of which came from the value of homes. this happens again and again in American history, where the United States strips Black and brown people, indigenous people, of their land, their cultures, their languages, their ancestry. And it's until the United States has some sort of truth and reconciliation with itself, and we're not trying to ban books, and we're not trying to, like, you know, get away from the ethno-fascism that Trump has been inspiring. I mean, that's the real enemy. That's the real problem. I mean, that's the one sad thing about Trump leaving office is, like, he was such an easy person for all of us to hate and for all of us to recognize as, like, you know, the empire was naked and the king was flaccid and weak. And that was clear with Trump. But with liberals like Biden, I think, like, people tend to forget that. But tell you Biden's going to give us, you know, reparations or anybody land, you know, the architect of mass incarceration, one of the architects wrong with all the Clinton Democrat, neoliberal Democrats. But we have to readjust our focus. We have to look at the stories that we tell about each other. We definitely shouldn't erase the intricacies of the things Marilyn is talking about, because it's absolutely necessary that these civilized tribes, like, begin to, like, decolonize themselves and remove, you know, the stain of white supremacy within their cultures and communities and societies. And, you know, I battle that here with Anishinaabe folks too. I mean, that's real. Like, I mean, I have, like, light skin, white passing Anishinaabe folks, you know, telling me that they don't like what I do. They don't like that I build with Anishinaabe communities across the Great Lakes, that they, you know, don't think I'm native or I have X, Y, and Z rights to be in X, Y, and Z spaces. And sure, like, I could tell those stories till, you know, my face turns blue, and, like, it's important. I prefer to tell them and talk about them when I'm with people of color. You're never going to catch me going around talking and having these conversations openly with a bunch of white people, because that's not necessarily their business, not necessarily the narratives and stories I want to be uplifting about our communities. Right. This is lateral violence, and we got to deal with this among each other.
Mm-hmm. Keep this in-house. This is people of color's business and Black folks' business and indigenous people business. We're going to exclude the white folks out of the conversation. Y'all can watch, but y'all can't participate at this point in time. Marilyn, the final point I wanted us to hit before we wrap up has to do with this change.org petition. Dwayne, can we pop that up if we could? Encouraging Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who was the first Native woman to be elected to Congress, who is under consideration for a cabinet position with the Biden administration to possibly head up the Department of the Interior. Black Native people are less than pleased with Congresswoman Haaland because of her past comments surrounding de-enrollment. Talk to us about this petition, Marilyn, and what is it that Black Indigenous people want here?
Okay, what the Black Indigenous people would like to hear is for the Congresswoman or any other person that is being considered for Interior or Assistant Secretary of Interior to support the use of the government tools to enforce the 1866 treaties, where the situation with Congresswoman Haaland is that she did not support language going into Indian housing bills, which would, how do I want to say it, tie whether or not an Indian tribe received federal funds, depending on whether they were in compliance with their 1866 treaty obligations to freedmen descendants. Now, and so she did not support language going on some housing bills that are already out there. And we have, myself and the Congresswoman have even had conversation where she doesn't support Congress doing passing laws in order to enforce these treaty rights. Now, she believes that she appears to believe that it's up to the tribes to enforce the treaties. or possibly federal agencies can do some things. But this would be similar to some white congressperson back in 1950 saying, "Well, I don't think Congress ought to pass a law like what eventually became the Voting Rights, the Civil Rights Act. Those states down there in Alabama and Mississippi, they need to get their own act together. It's on them." I mean, and that's what it sounds like to a person like myself, who's a member of a tribe, who has a freedman ancestor, who's of African Indian ancestry. That's what it sounds like to us. And so before this position is filled, which is very important, the Secretary of Interior, before the position is filled, I think we need to make it clear what we want, what we expect. It's not enough that the person that fills this position be a member of a federal tribe. That's not enough if they're just going to do what the chiefs want. Some chiefs have really made it clear, like the Choctaw chief, who wrote a letter to the Speaker Pelosi that if the freedmen are having economic or any kind of problems, hey, that's the federal government's fault. Not wanting to take any responsibility that the poor conditions of the Choctaw freedmen are the fault of the Choctaw Nation or the Choctaw leadership or their current policy. That is in black and white.
Wow. Johnny J, I got to get you in on this because Marilyn makes an amazing analogy there, because it definitely smacks of a states' rights kind of argument, but the tribes have a point too, right? We've discussed tribal sovereignty many times. And is this a tribal sovereignty issue? Do the tribes have the authority to actively discriminate against their Black members, or can the federal government compel the tribes to adhere to these treaties?
If the tribe has signed, tribal leaders, they made a decision in 1866 in order to have their government relationship that they would, of what they would do, regarding the people of African descent. The decision has already been made. A tribe has the right to limit their sovereignty to get something from the federal government, just as tribes like the Pamunkeys over there on the East Coast. They had laws where they would kick people out of the tribe if they married Black people, but they wanted their federal recognition. So about 2014, they had to take that law down because people like Gwen Moore, other Congress people, they were opposing them with this. So yes, a tribe can limit their own sovereignty to get something that they want.
Johnny J,
that's what they've done.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Marilyn, because what I find happens quite a bit in these discussions is that a lot of Native people will hide behind sovereignty. Anti-Blackness to them is a flex of sovereignty, and it's absolutely not. Like, if we can't honor our own treaties, then how can we start talking about the US government not honoring theirs? I mean, this comes down to the whole crux of the matter, in that Indigenous people should be setting the example. As soon as slavery was abolished, we should have been the ones, without a treaty even, making reparations, making amends with those that we harmed. Like, that should have been just a given. But instead, we were kind of forced into it with those treaties. And so a lot of what's going on now is a lot of these tribes feel that they are rebelling against the US government by expelling the freedmen. Like, to them, it's a flex. And it shouldn't be. And it shouldn't be something that we even view in that way, because it harms so many people, so many of our people. And disenrollment is a huge issue right now, because we have tribes that are disenrolling so many tribal members that they only have maybe 20 people left in their entire tribe. And, it's something that's a huge issue here in California, with tribes disenrolling tribal members because of money, because a lot of tribes get per cap checks from casinos or other business endeavors. And for tribes that share that money with their people, there's a huge incentive to disenroll. And, you see this playing out with the freedmen as well, because it does come down to money. You see the Choctaw people, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee have over 5 times the operating budget of the entire state of Oklahoma. They are some of the wealthiest tribes in the US, but they are very limiting in how they share that money. They have great programs, they have great hospitals, you know, they do a lot for local communities, but they absolutely do decide who to share that money wealth, who to share that wealth with, and how. Even as a Choctaw person who is living here in California, you know, I don't qualify for a lot of the benefits that a lot of other Choctaws do. You have to live in what they call a service area. And they use that to kind of exclude even other Choctaw people from being able to share in those benefits. And, you know, it's when you look at what's going on right now with like the anti-Blackness, with them trying to use sovereignty as an excuse, like saying that we reserve the right to decide who is and who isn't Native. You know, that's absolutely true. But at the same time, you can't use that or abuse that power to discriminate against your own people. And, you know, as I've said time and time again, you know, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Seminole, you know, all of these tribes, like the freedmen are our people, and we cannot keep discriminating against them and using our sovereignty as some kind of weird flex to continue being anti-Black and to continue discriminating against people. Like, that's not what sovereignty was intended for. It's not what, it was never a traditional value of ours. So, you know, it's something that we absolutely need to stop doing and to discuss more and to stop. Like, as soon as you see somebody, I think, using that flex, like, oh no, it's up to the tribes, then you need to be like, no, these were already decided by treaties. Treaties, as we say all the time, are the supreme law of the land. So we need to abide by the treaties that we agreed to. Like 100%, no question, no arguing. Like, if we want the US to govern, the US government to follow those treaties and to honor the treaties, then we have to do that too. And we should be setting the precedent, not just waiting.
Antonio, I'm gonna let you get the last word on this. Is this an opportunity for the freedmen to place political pressure upon Congresswoman Holland, or even on the Biden administration, you know, contingent upon her being confirmed as a potential Interior Secretary? We have these demands of her once she enters this position. What is your take on tribal sovereignty versus, you know, the honoring of the treaties that included the freedmen into this nation?
Within any community where I'm not a part of, how to organize and what they should be doing. I think Marilyn is going to be the best to be strategizing around those issues, and the folks who are, like, you know, on the ground and you know, they're going to know best. But I'll tell you this, like, I don't like giving up sovereignty. I don't like asking the government for anything. I don't think like this situation and this divide empowers any of the communities that we need to. And I would say, like, those of us who consider ourselves leftists, young people, tribal folks from across the country, you know, for my folks, you know, on both sides of the border in Coltecan territory, we all need to, like, bear pressure on these tribal governments from other tribal communities, because that's the kind of thing we need to be mobilizing in our communities against the reactionary, colonized mentality that exists within our own. You know, this is my call to action for all the other folks across the country to step in and weigh in as Indigenous peoples against these governments that are stripping Black Indigenous people of their rights and their resources. And I think desperately in the short term, we need to move beyond this conversation of, you know, in Black Indigenous folks not getting accepted to, like, how is it that Black people and Native people are just building together? And there's a surprising amount of indigeneity within African-American people that's unclaimed as well, and this is, like, beyond the folks who, like, disrolled. So we need to get past this problem, because the crabs in a barrel sort of stuff that we have happening now is going to have us all boiling to death in the melting pot. And we don't have time. We just straight up don't have time to keep fucking around like this. Like, this is like climate chaos. We are in the empire of the world that's producing the most oil, that's pushing a neoliberal form of capitalism that is like destroying labor and searching for, making capital free and people and labor enslaved. We do not have time. We do not have time. The climate is not waiting. Fascists aren't waiting. The United States, empire war machine is not waiting. And if we're all fighting each other over who is this or who isn't what, instead of building solidarity, instead of like trying to do something different, instead of reclaiming our cultures, reclaiming our languages, reclaiming our relationships with our ancestry and our motherlands, getting to our medicines, getting out to the land, sharing those medicines, sharing resources. That's the kind of stuff we need to be doing right now. And fighting over who's in the club or who isn't or who belongs or who doesn't, Black, Indigenous, brown, people of color in the United States, colonized people, people from the global South. We don't have time. We got to get past this because we have a lot of important work to do. And a lot of that's going to look like us building real relationships with each other, getting out on the land and doing work together, sharing medicines, sharing stories, and dancing, partying, eating, connecting, and building and fortifying ourselves for whatever, chaos that's going to be coming next from this empire.
We're going to leave the conversation right there. Well said. We've been speaking with Antonio Cosme. Antonio is an Indigenous economist and activist, also a beekeeper in Detroit. We appreciate Antonio joining us. We've also been speaking today with Marilyn Vann. Marilyn is the president of the Descendants of the Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribe Association. She's in with us today from Oklahoma. And Johnny J, co-host of De-Colonized News Hour, also Indigenous activist and journalist, joining us today from California. Panel, thank you so much. This was extremely educational and eye-opening, and I hope to continue to talk about this, but in the broader sense in which Antonio brought up, like how can Black and Indigenous start building together in order to not only survive, but thrive in this settler colonial state. But there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to end the racism and intra-community discrimination. So I appreciate the three of you making some time to speak on this today. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you. Thank you, Johnny. Take care, y'all.
Hey.
So y'all heard it here. I just wanted y'all to hear that bill so you can understand what's going on in Indian country, man. This is shit we need to be involved in. So all that other shit is foolery. You already said, man. We need to be sharing resources, really doing shit. All of this arguing is fighting about what bloodline and lineage you come from. It's crazy. But y'all, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Those that was active in the comments, starting conversation. Those that gave me an email, well, yeah, hit me on the email. I'm gonna hit you back. We gonna pretty much we're gonna go about it here the same way we came in. Yo, peace, love, and light to the fam.